Today we journey to the heart of a battle that transcends mere political lines and delves deep into the soul of democracy. A saga that began this past June, when the Supreme Court's gavel resounded with a landmark verdict shaking the very foundation of Alabama's congressional map. The echoes of civil rights and the power of Black voters reverberated throughout this gripping tale. A trio of federal judges now stand at the crossroads of history, charged with the monumental task whether Alabama's Republican supermajority, in their haste, succeeded in fulfilling the High Court's order. A single question looms large. Has a second majority Black district been forged, or does the map merely tread the edge of compliance? The twists don't stop there. In a bold gambit, Alabama Republicans have dared to redraw lines, igniting controversy by amplifying the voice of Black voters in one majority white district, even as Democrats and Black communities voice their outcry. The stakes? They're national. Congress teeters on a knife's edge, with the balance of power swaying on a slender thread held by the Republican Party. Will the judge's gavel uphold this new map, or will it herald the rise of a second majority Black district that could sway the course of history? But before we dive into the latest courtroom drama, let's rewind the tape. How did Alabama's original map come into being? Why did Black voters raise their voices in protest, sparking a legal battle that now captivates the nation's attention? A tug of war between history, rights, and representation ensues. A glance back reveals a state's tumultuous relationship with federal laws, a dance between defiance and compliance that stretches across time. Battles fought, victories won, and yet the struggle endures. Fast forward to the present day, where the fate of this new map rests on the shoulders of a panel of judges. The courtroom becomes a battlefield of ideas, where lawyers paint vivid arguments, where principle meets political strategy. As the deliberations unfold, the nation watches, for the outcome will resonate far beyond Alabama's borders. The ripples could reach states across the South, where redistricting challenges pose a conundrum. Today, I have the privilege of being joined by a key player in this narrative, a figure whose presence illuminates the path of progress. Alabama State Representative Anthony Daniels. Young, bold, and unyielding, Representative Daniels commands attention as the first African-American minority leader of the Alabama House of Representatives. Representing District 53, his voice echoes with the force of change, challenging the status quo. So settle in as we embark on this journey through the halls of power, where lines on a map shape the destiny of a state and where a single decision carries the weight of history. This is episode 115 of the Political Mike Podcast. Representative Daniels, thank you so much for being a part of today's episode.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike.
Representative Daniels, the recent Supreme Court ruling on Alabama's congressional map has ignited a debate about the power of Black voters and their representation. Can you share your thoughts on how this legal battle reflects the broader struggles for civil rights and equitable representation that Alabama has faced over the years?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you again for having me. But I would tell you that African Americans in the state of Alabama makes up about 28% of the votes in the state of Alabama. From a population standpoint, they represent about 28% of the state's population. The minority population in general represents about 34% of the state's overall population. And to have 7 congressional districts with only one African American district reduces the opportunity and influence of African American voices and many other minority voices. And so what we're dealing with right now is pure greed. The other side has chosen to, as you mentioned, they've chosen defiance over compliance. But in that courtroom this week, the judges recognized and saw through all of the political gamesmanship. In fact, they referenced it quite a few times in their response as it relates to the questions that they asked directly to Attorney LaCour. It seems that his focus was more about loyalty than law. Instead of following the Constitution or following the law and following the guidance from these judges, he chose to try to build a racial gerrymandering claim. But he's misunderstanding the fact that Section 2, there are protections and protected class in Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act that he is trying to circumvent. And so what that tells me is that this is just one of those cases that they're going to use to try to elevate a racial gerrymandering case. He also referenced the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. And so it was very clear that he wants, and I quote, he mentioned that he did not waive the right to look beyond the moment. But to African Americans in the state of Alabama to be 28% of the population in the state of Alabama with only a representation of one actual district where their voices are actually heard is a travesty. It reminds me of the moments in time where my grandmother and others used to talk about the posture in the 1960s. And so I never thought that I would be reliving today a situation to where African American voices will be muted or marginalized by using political gamesmanship instead of allowing this community to have a voice or have influence. And so there are clear facts in this case. The courts mentioned that there could be a second majority African American district or quite close where African Americans have the opportunity to elect their candidates of choice. While he's trying to make this out to be a an African American issue itself, what it is any community, there's no community in America that could have influence over electing their person of choice if they're not the majority. And we know that racial polarization voting in the state of Alabama exists. You look in the Wiregrass area, you look in different areas, and especially in more rural areas than urban centers, where an African American candidate in the district that they've drawn, that they consider an opportunity district, could only is 0 out of 15 chance of winning. The last 15 elections, an African American won 0 times. And so what we got to understand is that white voters in certain areas of the state of Alabama vote 98% based upon race, and only African Americans 92%. And so if 98%, they vote 98% based upon race, and they're the majority in a district, then what does that tell you? That tells you an African American has little to no chance of having influence over that particular election. And if they wanted to choose their candidate of choice, if that person was African American, they don't have a chance. And so this is what this case is really about. But I'm very disappointed that the Alabama legislature decided not to follow the guidance set out from the courts in responding to the question. They wasted the court's time, as you mentioned before. That was sheer defiance, and they chose not to focus on law but loyalty, and that is evident of what Mr. LaCour has decided to do in trying to represent the state in this case.
Representative Daniels, as the youngest and first African-American minority leader of the Alabama House of Representatives, you hold a unique position in shaping the discourse and policy in the state. How do you see the current redistricting challenge influencing the broader dialogue around representation, not just in Alabama, but across the nation?
Well, I think that, I feel very good about our chances of prevailing in this case. I do think that we have to be as careful as we were careless to allow ourselves to be in this situation where we weren't necessarily paying close attention to the pre-clearance during redistricting around the 2010 timeframe. And so we got to make certain that we are not as careless as we were during that particular moment, because we're seeing the impacts today where voices are not necessarily where they need to be. What's important is that the African American community, there is a high number of what they call rare and sporadic voters. And so one of the things that we have to do as a community, we have to not allow ourselves to be influenced by individuals pouring cold water on our opportunities of electing our person of choice, but instead embracing in building a pipeline of leaders that's going to be the voices for our community. But I will say this. One of the quotes that I use from, Dr. Joe Reed and others have said this in the past: we can't send hungry boys and hungry girls to get our lunch. You don't have representation if you do that. So you have to make certain that whoever you're sending to represent you, they can be African American, but anyone that you send to represent you needs to understand and be reflective of the values that exist within your community and understand your community. Otherwise, you will continue to be on the table instead of at the table as a race of people. And so we got to build that pipeline, and we got to make certain that we're, electing individuals that that's for us and that's going to represent us in the best way possible.
The courtroom seems to be focusing on legal tactics rather than addressing the core issues of representation and equal rights that you had talked about. How can legislators and legal professionals better, in your view, balance the need for strategic maneuvers with the responsibility to uphold the integrity of the legal system?
Well, I think we have to be consistent. One of the things that I think that we've fallen short on is we've fallen short on educating our community as to the impact from dating back from the census to even representation at the local level to the state level. I think that we have to also look at where do we go from here? You have once you get an opportunity, how do you sustain that opportunity? And how do you make this law stronger? We got to position ourselves to have impact on the laws. And so, when you have a community where there are over 500,000 people that look like me that are considered infrequent voters in a state like Alabama, well, that means that we're not exercising our right to vote at the level that we should, and we can have influence on every local and state and congressional election that we want to have, that we want to have influence in and have a voice in, and making certain that they're reflecting the values of our community. Because right now it's laughable, and they're laughing at us when we're trying to fight and be reactive to trying to address some of the issues and concerns. But we also need to call on our allies, those individuals, other communities, and other groups, whether it's minority groups or groups in general, that consider themselves allies to our community. They got to come from behind the curtains. They got to help us in this fight. We're not going to just win this fight alone. Every fight that we won in the state of Alabama and across the country for people of color, or African Americans in particular, we won it in the courts. And so therefore, it appears to me that the other side is realizing that, and they're trying to focus on advancing individuals that are loyal. They're focusing on more on loyalty than they are law, because you can see an example of that. And Mr. LaCour was on the short list. He was being recommended on during the Trump administration as an attorney. I mean, as a judge. Thank God that Biden was able to withdraw him and set it aside. But he has a point to prove to get to that judgeship. And so it's becoming more about loyalty to a party and an ideology as opposed to law.
The history of Alabama is one that could be described as the intersection of politics, law, and race, whether you go back to the civil rights era or even today. In light of the recent court hearings that we discussed a little bit earlier, how optimistic are you about the state's progress, or the state's ability to continue to make progress in terms of upholding the principles of the Voting Rights Act, and ensuring that all citizens, regardless of their background, regardless of race, can fully participate in the democratic process, especially as we're heading into another election season?
What I believe, as I mentioned before, the courts have been necessary. That we've used the law on our side. We focus on the facts, and so I think that long term, we got to start playing 3D chess. We've been playing checkers for a long time. It's time to play 3D chess, and because at the end of the day, the other side, they focus a lot on the judicial races from a statewide perspective, where you don't have any African Americans elected statewide in the state of Alabama, and it's very difficult for them to. And they typically underperform voters. I mean, you don't know their white counterparts, and so I think one of the things that we have to really have a conversation about is how do we create a society where people are judged by the content of their character, and not just by the color of their skin. But what I see right now, some will say there's not a need for pre-clearance, which was gutted during the Shelby case, and there's no, the oversight that exists over Alabama should not be. Well, I understand that it should not be, but we've not come as far as we thought we've come. Because at the end of the day, if I have evidence that racial polarization exists where I mentioned 98% of white voters vote for a white candidate, it's impossible for African Americans to make the progress that they need. And so, especially in those areas that less degreed as a Huntsville and some other areas of the state. And so you can't make the same argument that you can make in Huntsville that they're trying to make in the Wiregrass and other areas when the evidence is already there.
The Supreme Court's decision emphasized the need for a second majority black district or something in quote close to it. As a leader in Alabama's political scene, how do you view the new map drawn by the Republican majority? And if you could also shed light on the role that those who are going to be tasked with creating a new map, the role that that plays, how significant that is moving forward.
Well, I think it's extremely significant that we get a second a district where African Americans have the ability to elect their candidate of choice. If that's a black candidate, great. If that's not an African American candidate, it's same, because we just want to be in a position to be able to give African Americans an opportunity to elect their candidate of choice. African Americans elected Doug Jones as their candidate of choice, with an African American also running in the primary, two African Americans running in that primary for the U.S. Senate. And so I think at the end of the day, some of where we are and what we're arguing, there are facts to back it up. And so as long term, I am optimistic about the courts from what was presented and the questions that were asked. I do think that the map that the state has drawn is not responsive in the guidance that have been provided by the courts. In fact, they decided not to and waste the court's time of going through political theater because the Attorney General asked to give the legislation an opportunity to redraw the district lines to fit what the courts are saying by where African Americans have the ability to elect their candidate of choice. It's a majority African American district or quite close. Quite close is not 39.8%. That's impossible. And with the evidence that's already been put in place on the racial gerrymandering, the courts at the state level and the federal level in the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as the district court that's dealing with the cases before right now, they recognize that we have not come as far as we need to should have come because of racial polarization voting. Hopefully one day that racial polarization voting won't exist, but until that day comes, we got something to work toward. And so maybe this is an opportunity for lawmakers and those policymakers that are within the state of Alabama and across the country to start focusing on ways to reduce racial polarization. And I think that the presidential race has shown us that people are more bold, have been emboldened to continue to take us backwards instead of forward in a positive way. And so we are a long way away from not needing help and needing to be able to have a voice.
Representative Daniels, you represent District 53. Of Alabama, and you hold the esteemed position of being the youngest and the first African-American minority leader in the Alabama House of Representatives. Given this background, how does the issue of redistricting and the power of minority voices resonate with you personally and politically?
It resonates very well, Mike, because at the end of the day, I'm from the Black Belt. I was raised in Bullock County, a little small town called Midway, Alabama, within the Black Belt. And so I understand that while I'm in Huntsville, Alabama right now, I'm dealing with a different group of people. I'm dealing with people that are used to, where diversity and inclusion is important and prioritized, but in other parts of the state, it's not. The education level here in Madison County, we have, the most PhDs per capita in the Southeast. And so you have a lot of people that are used to working with people of different races, different income level, and embrace diversity and equity and inclusion. But in other parts of the state, we've not moved as aggressively in the direction that we need to move in. Where we've not seen evidence of that there's not a problem in those areas. We've seen evidence that that could be potentially still be a problem in the Madison County area, but it's less likely to be the priority. At the end of the day, Madison County voted 46% for Joe Biden. Okay. And African Americans in this community is only like 20-something%. But if you go to any other county in the state of Alabama and rural Alabama, the central part of the state where they're trying to draw the second district, guarantee you that you'll see a different outcome. Unless, and also looking at Barack Obama's election, it'll show you that racial polarization exists from whether it's Obama to Hillary to Biden. And so it shows you that it still exists, even in these parts of the state, in this part of the state. May not be as blatant as it is in central part of the state and in a lot of our rural communities, but it exists. And we're not beyond that. And until we get beyond that, we can't even begin to have the conversation about, is an equal playing field and grab yourself up by your own bootstraps when you don't have any boots. So that we gotta really reset our minds and our thoughts to figure out, okay, the facts are here's the evidence. Here's where the pattern of voting. Here's where people have chosen, made their candidates of choice based upon, a lot of it is based upon race. And it saddens me, but that's why we got to focus a lot of our attention on education and exposure, so that diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not erasing history and what has brought us this far, and some of the things that we've learned from. I learned from the history of the past. I've never been trained to dislike anyone or conditioned to dislike anyone because of what happened, to my ancestors. No, I take people from face value. I take them at who they are today and what the actions that they've shown to me of who they are. But right now, looking at the voting patterns in the state of Alabama, we're just not ready to not need help from the courts and from the federal level.
The legal battle over Alabama's congressional map seems to underscore the potential power that an individual Supreme Court justice can have in shaping legal outcomes. In your view, how can we strike a balance between the independence of judges and the need for transparency and accountability in their decision-making processes?
Well, from a state perspective, I personally don't think that judges should be running in a party, because at the end of the day, as politics and as interpretation of the law exists, where you're giving individuals an opportunity to rule based upon political ideology instead of the legal, being interpreting the law, is a problem. And it presents a problem because the parties are pressuring those individuals or threatening not to put them on the ballot, allow them to be their primary or running their primaries. Those things presents a problem in the process. And so we have a great system. We have the best system in the world, but all systems need to be modernized at some point. And I think that judges should be running in nonpartisan races, and that they should be probably publicly financed so that it's not an advantage one person versus the other, but it gives them an opportunity on equal playing field to be able to discuss it. And so if you're taking political or financial support away from giving them an opportunity to have support from the various parties or the party bosses and the most influential individuals within the party, if we reduce their influence over these candidates that are running for these judicial offices, maybe we'll get back to the foundation of where we're supposed to be, of following the laws and not legal ideology. I mean, not ideology, but we're following laws and not being defiant.
Have there been any state efforts in the House of Representatives in the state of Alabama to have a state version of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, or some kind of piece of legislation that would safeguard and secure the votes of minorities in the state of Alabama? And if so, how confident are you that that piece of legislation could soon be passed within this term of the House of Representatives in Alabama, or maybe in a next term?
I don't see that being possible, Mike, just to be honest with you. I think that, there have been several attempts to make voting easier and access easier. Hopefully, at some point, we will have these conversations again about access and expanding access. But I think that a lot of the rhetoric that has been happening has been based upon the narrative and the false narrative of election being stolen in the last presidential election. That continues to be a conversation. And so instead of making it easier for individuals to have access to voting, the attempt is to make it very difficult. And there are a couple of bills introduced, one to eliminate, to penalize or criminalize. They call it ballot harvesting, but I call it absentee voting. And there are some unfound claims that have been made that further gives the political theater legs for them to be able to run with another false narrative of somehow the election was stolen. It's stolen when it's not in their favor. But when it's in their favor, this process worked out the way it should. And so, it's all about convenience and political expediency.
Representative Daniels, we're heading into election, the likes of which this country's never seen before. We have a former president who's been indicted 3 times now. He has 2 federal charges, 2 state charges swirling over his head. You have folks who are seeking to help overturn the election if things don't go their way like it did in 2020. You have people who are on the left side who feel somewhat apathetic towards the progress Democrats have made. They feel as if minority votes have been taken for granted by Democrats. What is your message to those who find themselves disillusioned by the political system based on all that is going on as we're heading into what's going to be an unprecedented and wild ride that is the election of 2024?
Well, I would say to them, the consequences of not being engaged in the process is going to be far greater and damaging for them and their children and grandchildren long term. The apathy is in my mind should not exist. When you look at the facts of deliverables to the community and to our states and to our communities in general, whether it's more funding for Black farmers, whether it's expanding opportunities for small businesses, whether it's more investments in education, COVID dollars to help higher education and HBCUs get rid of some of their debt, whether it's creating the infrastructure for broadband across the state so that we're bridging that digital divide, whether it's putting together an infrastructure bill that's going to help with your road and bridges and other things. There's a laundry list of things that have been accomplished by the current president, Biden. Yeah, you may look at him, but you're looking at him and not looking at his policy. At the end of the day, we should be looking at the policies and things that he delivered for us and the things that he's working on versus those things that are being articulated by the talking heads that are not necessary, that where they're using an angle to attack. At the end of the day, whether it's from the left that may be disappointed that certain things are not happening fast enough, well, get out and vote. We don't have the majority in the House of Representatives. So compromise is what you have to do. At the end of the day, it is healthy to compromise, to be honest with you. Compromise is healthy. But defiant and just playing political games to push back because it's the other party that's pushing it, that doesn't make sense to me. A good idea, doesn't matter who it comes from, is a good idea if it's impactful for the community. And so I think that instead of paying attention to what's going on, these other distractions or things that someone may say that have not necessarily been tested as being factual, getting your news from Facebook may be good, but it's not necessarily mean that it's factual. and be careful about what you read and the credibility of it. And so I think that what we have to do, we cannot allow ourselves to be apathetic about what's going on in America, because at the end of the day, this election and future elections and this election in general, it's about your future, it's about your children's future and grandchildren's future. And so that's what's at stake. And sitting on the sidelines and complaining, sitting on the sidelines and complaining and not going and becoming a part of the process, that's nonsense to me, and that's insanity. We've seen it when we stayed home in 2016. We saw what happened, and so we don't want to repeat that mistake in 2024. This is going to be a much larger cost.
The Inflation Reduction Act, on that same note, Representative, has now reached its 1-year mark. And when you look at what was inside of this particular piece of legislation, you're looking at $16 billion to combat greenhouse gases and cut carbon pollution, $7 billion to connect and restore coasts, wetlands, and forests, $3 billion to an environmental justice grant program, giving community-based organizations resources to address pollution locally, tax credits for new and used electric vehicles, clean energy tax credits that make it cheaper to deploy wind and solar power, and funding to develop plans to deal with the impacts of a changing climate and build more resilient communities. Could you touch on how the Inflation Reduction Act and the climate policies in this bill, of course, this is the largest investment in climate change, has impacted your state of Alabama?
Well, I think that what it's done is allowed us to expand the opportunities in our Jobs Act. Right now in the state of Alabama, we're trying to diversify the employment and the opportunities that we bring into our state. Right now, electric vehicles are being manufactured by Hyundai as well as Mercedes. As you know, we're probably the second largest, auto manufacturer in the country. In the state of Alabama, where we have all of these auto manufacturers. We have Toyota Mazda, and others. And so the electric vehicle piece is important, especially with building out the infrastructure and allowing and creating more opportunities. And it also helps the environment. The other piece that I see is in the Alabama Jobs Act, we added a portion in there that allowed us an opportunity to diversify in some of the new jobs that actually have impact on the environment. I think that our utility companies are moving in a direction to really help also be good corporate citizens to address some of these issues, despite what anyone may say. There's evidence of that. You're looking at organizations and places and like in Lowndes County, where they have the water issues and other places across the state of Alabama and across the country. You see those investments being made. You see folks applying for it. But I think that what communities have to understand is that they have to make certain that their elected officials and their administrators within their communities and towns are taking advantage of all the opportunities at the federal level. And I don't think all of our communities are. So I think that this administration has made it very flexible. Even the usage of how to draw down on funds, communities that don't have a whole lot of revenue was given a lot of support during COVID. And so it should put them in position to be able to have enough matching funds to take advantage of some of this, where they may use the funds that were sent to them in other areas, and then it gives them opportunities to create a reserve so that they can look at ways to leverage their local dollars to draw down on federal dollars. And so there are a lot of things, creation of new small businesses and opportunity, while at the same time improving the quality of life and having the environment at the same time. And so I think it's great. And I don't think enough cities and towns have taken advantage of it, but there are so a lot of those that are taking advantage of it. And so we're really excited about the opportunities. And from the research and development side of it, you have, higher education institutions that are being engaged in the research side of it, the R&D side of it, and partnering with manufacturers. Right now, ADECA, right now dealing with the electric vehicle program. The governor is committed to it as well. And so I think it's It's great. I wish we could have gotten here long before seeing the consequences of not trying to get there, get here. And so I hope that we double down on our efforts to try to save our planet long term.
What are your thoughts on President Biden's decision to keep the Space Command Center in the state of Colorado rather than move it to Huntsville in light of Senator Tuberville's decision to get in the way of some crucial nominations that should have taken place by now, crucial military nominations over its abortion policy?
Well, I certainly understand politics because this decision was, um, you know, I'm disappointed that it didn't come to Madison County and Huntsville because Tuberville doesn't represent me. He may represent us as a U.S. senator, but it's evident that his representation is not being positively reflected as Richard Shelby, former Senator Shelby's was. If Senator Shelby was in office, there's no way we would have lost Space Command. I think that from a data standpoint, we were positioned well to get Space Command, but the theatrics from our U.S. senator could have had could have contributed to us not getting it, because at the end of the day, if you're holding up these important nominations, confirmations, right? Then what that tells you, we say we're a pro-military state, and then our U.S. senator goes and does something opposite and counter to our belief as state officials. And so that is disappointing that our senator engaged in political theatrics instead of thinking about the people of Alabama. The other part to this is I just can't believe we lost against Lauren Boebert. We allowed Lauren Boebert to beat us out, and so that is duly noted that our senator engaged in those theatrics and really cost us Space Command.
Representative Daniels, my last question is, what advice do you have for young people who are intrigued by politics? They want to enter a career politics and public service, but they're a little cautious in light of the high tension that the political arena seems to have, the hostility that one side seems to show the other. What is your advice to them as a representative from a southern state?
Here's what I would say. In politics, there are role players just like there are in sports. Understanding what contributing role can you offer the team. At the end of the day, the team always need players, new players. And so what I would say is you go into politics not necessarily trying to elevate as an individual, but it's trying to elevate the cause of the people that you represent and the party that you're running in. At the end of the day, I've never been boxed in as a Democrat to tell me what policy I should be for and what policy I should be against, right? And so, which is a beautiful thing about being in the Democratic Party, you have the opportunity to deal with issues that actually have impact on your community. And I don't look at issues as conservative issues or liberal issues. I look at areas of common ground. I would tell you that for me, the Speaker of the House in the state of Alabama, he's one of my best friends. And we're on opposite side of the aisles, but at the end of the day, the team that we're on is Team Alabama. Whatever works is going to work for the state of Alabama for us to move the state forward. And they operate in the same posture in Alabama Senate. And so in Alabama, despite what you may see talked about, there's a lot of issues that we deal with where there's common ground, and that we can't give up on that. And so for young people, it's like playing on the junior varsity, okay? And you're trying to work hard to get to the varsity. But if the varsity needs a rebounder and you are a shooting guard, well, if there's no slots for shooting guards on the varsity, then you're going to ride the bench, and you have to contend with that. But if there's only one spot left and they're looking for a rebounder, then you need to make the adjustments to be that rebounder. At the end of the day, we don't play individual ball in politics and as a caucus. We don't play individual ball. We play team ball. There are certain players that are shooters. There are certain players that are rebounders. There are certain players that come in and give you a few minutes on this, that, and the other. And so I liken it to this. There are individuals that are tree shakers, and there are those of us that are jelly makers. But you can't be both. And you got to understand what role the team needs you in, and you satisfy that role. Then you are able to adjust. They can make the appropriate adjustments if it's not working to move you in to another role. But you have to humble yourself to do whatever it is the team needs you to do. And in politics, it's not all about just elected office. We need folks that are helping with policy development, playing offense. We need folks to students that and young people that may have a background in legal law or policy to be able to look and interpret the policy that's on the legislation that's being introduced to help us play better defense. We need individuals to help with the platform development, things that are reflective of the state of Alabama, and not taking a one-size-fit approach. Because oftentimes we look at the national issues and we say, oh, that seems popular and everybody's doing it. Well, it may not work for the state that you're in. So you have to make the adjustments for the game and the team that you're playing with or against. And that's one of the issues in politics that I think a lot of young people fail to understand, is that when I got in, I was probably 32 years old when I got in office, when I was elected to office. And I was elected minority leader 2.5 years after that. Well, I played the role that I need to play when I got in the legislature. And I've been minority leader ever since. This is my third time being elected minority leader. And so for me, one of the things what you have to look at is, I looked at what role can I play. I sat and observed from the sidelines and try to understand what buttons to push with individuals, what are they interested in, and building a personal relationship. We cannot allow politics and the bickering at the federal level to dictate how we operate in politics. We have to change that dynamic. We have to change the perception. People are tired of seeing the bickering back and forth. Now, for me, I take shots when I need to take shots. I can play defense, I can play offense. Whatever the team needs me to be or needs me to play, that's what I'm going to play. And it's not, although I'm the leader, I can also be a rebounder and take the back seat to those individuals that are subject matter experts. For me, I want to see more subject matter experts in politics because it helps us make solid and better policies. Individuals that's not taking a cookie cutter approach or one size fit all approach, right? That's the part about being unique. For me, I'm a small business guy. I'm a former elementary school teacher as well. And then before that, I was working with the National Education Association on policies like the college affordability campaign. And so I've made the shift and the adjustments, but I've gained a lot of knowledge in areas that the typical person, the average person, may not have. But I try to offer my expertise to the team in order to help the team. So it's all about humbleness and not necessarily the day you get in, you want to be at the top. My situation was I didn't go into the legislature seeking to be minority leader. There was the timing of it all really worked out. And there are some folks that are twice my senior that came to me about running because I have a fundraising background. I've been at the national level. I understand. I look at things a lot different, and I apply more of a practical sense. And then I'm a distributor. I distribute the ball. I'm like a point guard, right? I want to make everybody else a better around me, and I'm gonna make certain that they work hard. They're going to get rewarded. They're going to get the ball, right? They're going to be able to shoot. But right now, we just got on, and that's what's wrong with politics from a national perspective. We allow red states like Alabama. We're in a moment in time where Alabama is looked at nationally right now. But there's no infrastructure in Alabama from a party infrastructure or resources that have been poured into Alabama for the long game. And so now you win the case and lose the race. Let's win the case and win the race. But we're not going to win the race if we're not putting any infrastructure, any resources in place and operating differently. And so sometimes our young people in politics volunteer for a campaign, figure out how it works, shadow a representative to see, because at the end of the day, it may or may not be what you want to do at the end of the day. And so you got to figure it out. But you got to also figure out and say, hey, I'm willing to play whatever role the team needs me to play. We don't need a point guard. We got one. We got two. We got a depth chart of point guards. Right? So figure out what we need and then jump in from there. So humble yourself.
Representative Daniels, this has been a wonderful discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I have to say, Congressman Daniels or Senator Daniels has a good ring to it. 2028 is around the horizon. So I don't know if you're going to give consideration.
I don't know, man. I got a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, and 12-year-old, and they need more daddy's time. But being the leader, it does require me to be away for some time, and I'm trying to manage that a lot better now and strike that work-life balance. Because at the end of the day, I want to be able to serve the people of Alabama, but I also want to be able to be a father and a husband as well.
Excellent. And I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much for what you brought to the table, Representative, in this episode 115. With that being said, that will conclude episode 115 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all so much. Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.